Hey, good evening, guys. Welcome once again to the SOAIR Cybersecurity Guide. This is week 5, section 9. I will be dealing with web application vulnerabilities, identifying common web application vulnerabilities, that is the SQLI and the XSS, which is the cross-site scripting. Then we'll be using Bob Suite for intercepting and testing HTTP traffic. Then our assignment is to exploit vulnerabilities in the DVWA, which is the down vulnerable web application. Web application vulnerabilities. Web applications are prone to multiple security vulnerabilities that attackers exploit to gain unauthorized access, steal data, or disrupt services. Below are some of the most common web application vulnerabilities, how to identify them, and prevention techniques. Web application vulnerabilities are security weaknesses in web applications that attackers can exploit to gain unauthorized access, steal data, or disrupt services. These are some of the most common web application vulnerabilities. Number 1 is the SQLI, SQL Injection. Description: attackers manipulate SQL queries by injecting malicious SQL code via the input fields. What are the impacts? It can lead to unauthorized access, data leaks, or even deletion of entire database. How then can you prevent such? Is the usage of prepared statements and parameterized queries. Next, to employ web application firewalls, that's the WAFs, then you limit database privileges. Next, we have the cross-site scripting, which is the XSS. What's the description? Injecting malicious scripts into web pages viewed by other users. What are their types? We have the stored XSS, which is the malicious script is permanently stored on the server. That's the meaning of the XSS, where malicious script is permanently stored on the server. Then we have the reflected XSS, which is the malicious script is reflected in response, e.g. search results. At this reflected XSS, the malicious script is reflected in the search results. Then we have the DOM-based XSS, which manipulates the document object model, which is the DOM, in a victim's browser. What's the impact of the cross-site scripting? It can steal cookies, your session tokens, and perform actions on behalf of the users. What is the prevention? Use HTML escaping and input validation. Implement content security policies, which is the CSP, then you sanitize your user input. Moving on, we have the cross-site request forgery, which is the CSRF. What's the description, or what does it mean? This is where an attacker tricks a user into executing unwanted action on a web application. What are the impacts? This can modify user data, transfer funds, or change settings without consent. How then can I prevent it? By using anti-CSRF tokens. Next, implement safe site cookies. Next, require user authentication for sensitive actions. Next, we have the broken authentication. What does it mean? This is poor authentication mechanism allows attackers to gain unauthorized access. What are the impact of the broken authentication? Account takeover, identity theft, and data breaches. How then do we prevent this? Use multi-factor authentication, be it 2-factor, 3-factor authentication. Next, you enforce strong password policies. Next, you implement session timeouts and secure session management. Number 5, we have the security misconfiguration, whereby using the correct settings in web applications, servers, or databases. What then are the impacts? This can lead to unauthorized access, data exposure, or remote code execution. How then do you prevent it? By regularly update and patch system, disable unnecessary services and features, then restrict access to configuration files. Next, we have number 6, which is the sensitive data exposure. What does this mean? This is the improper handling of sensitive data such as password, credit card information, or personal details. What are the impacts? Identity theft, financial fraud, and regulatory violation. How then do we prevent this? By encryption of sensitive data at encrypt sensitive data at rest and in transit. Next, you use strong hashing algorithm like the bcrypt or Agon2. Next, you avoid storing sensitive data unless necessary. Number 7, we have the IDOR, which means the Insecure Direct Object References. What does this mean? This is where attackers manipulate the URLs or parameters to access unauthorized data. What are the impacts? Data leaks, privilege escalation, and unauthorized modification. How then can we prevent this? By implementing proper access controls and authorization checks. Next, you use the UUIDs instead of the sequential IDs. Next, which is number 8, we have the SSRF, which is the server-side request forgery, where attackers manipulate server requests to access internal resources or services. What then are the impacts? This can bypass firewalls and access sensitive data. How then can we prevent them? By restriction of external and internal network access, by validating and sensitizing user input, then use allow list for URLs. Next, you have the XXE, which is the XML external entities, whereby exploiting XML parsers to access sensitive files or execute remote code. What are the impacts? We have the data theft, DOS, which is the denial of service, and remote code execution. How then can we prevent this? By disabling external entity processes, by using JSON instead of XML when possible, then by implementation of secured XML parsers. Number 10, we have the insufficient logging and monitoring, whereby lack of proper logging mechanism prevents detections of attack. What are the impacts? Delay responses to breaches and increased damages. How then do we prevent this? By enabling detailed logging and monitoring, by using security information and event management, which is the SIEM systems. They regularly review and analyze logs. Let's talk about two among them, which is the SQLI in depth. What is SQLI injection? SQL injection is a web security vulnerability that allows attackers to interfere with the queries that an application makes to its database. By injecting malicious SQL statements into input fields, attackers can bypass authentication, access sensitive data, modify database record, or even execute administrative operations. Number 2, how does the SQL injection work? SQLI exploits vulnerabilities in applications that improperly handle user input in SQL queries. When an application dynamically constructs SQL queries without proper validations or escaping, attackers can manipulate the query structure. Number 3, where is the real world explanation where SQL injection was used to attack? A, we have in 2019 the British Airways SQL injection breach, whereby attackers exploited SQLI to steal customer payment details, affecting over 400,000 customers. As a result of that, a whopping £183 million was the GDPR fine. Now, in 2008, we had the Atlant payment system breach, where over 130 million credit cards numbers were stolen using SQLI. What was the result? Estimated losses of $140 million. How then can we prevent this, and what are the prevention techniques? Number 1, use parameterized queries, which are also called prepared statements. Instead of concatenating user inputs in SQL queries, use parameterized queries. For Python, we have these particular lines of code. For PHP, we have these lines of code. Or you use the ORM, which is the Object Relational Mapping Libraries. ORM frameworks like the SQL Alchemy, Hibernate, Django ORM automatically handle queries securely. Number 3, implement input validation and whitelisting. This restricts inputs to extended formats, e.g., only allowed alphanumeric username. Do we get? Example is these lines of code below. Number 4, you limit database permission. Use the principle of least privilege. Read-only access to select queries. No access to drop, alter, or delete command unless necessary. Number 5, use a very strong web application firewall. Tools like the Mode Security, Cloudflare web application firewall or Imperva can detect and block SQLI attempts. Number 6, hide error message. Do not expose SQL errors to users. How then can you detect SQLI? Number 1, by automated tools for testing SQLI. SQL Map, which is a powerful open source tool. We have Bobsuit, which is a web application penetration testing tool. We have the Avid, which is the GUI based SQLI tool. Number 2, you have the manual testing techniques. Enter inverted bracket OR, close the inverted bracket, write 1 equals to write 1 again in login form to text for vulnerability. Check for database errors in responses. Now we have the cross-site scripting, which is the XSS. What then is the XSS? Cross-site scripting is a web security vulnerability that allows attackers to inject malicious scripts into web pages that are then executed in the browsers of other users. XSS is one of the most common web vulnerabilities and can be used to steal cookies, hijack sessions, deface websites, and spread malware. What are malware? Malicious software. What are the various types of XSS attack? We have the stored XSS, which is the persistent XSS. How does it work? Yeah, the attacker permanently stores a malicious script on the website database. Example, in a comment section, in a forum post, or a user profile. When another user visits the affected page, the script runs automatically in their browser. Example attack. The attacker submits a comment containing this script, which is the HTML code below. The website saves the comment without sanitizing the input. When another user visits the page, the script executes in their own browser. What are the real-world impacts? Stealing users' data, that is session hijacking, redirecting users to phishing websites, defacing web pages by injecting fake content. Number 2, we have the reflected XSS, which is the non-persistent XSS. How then does this work? Yeah, the attacker tricks a victim into clicking a specially crafted URL containing malicious JavaScript. The script executes in the victim's browser when the URL is opened. An example is this HTML line of code below. If the website displays user input without sanitization, the JavaScript executes, whereby attackers commonly send such links via email, social media, or messages. What are the real-world impacts? These are cause of phishing attacks, whereby stealing login credentials. Phishing attacks are an example of social engineering. Then we have session hijacking via cookies theft. Then we have the DOM-based XSS. What is DOM? Document Object Model. How does this work? The attack occurs within the browser's document object model and does not involve sending malicious script to the server. The attacker injects malicious JavaScript into an input field or URL, which is then processed by client-side JavaScript. An example is this line of code below. If an attacker sends this URL that is below, the browser executes the JavaScript, leading to XSS execution without server interaction. What is the real-world impact of the DOM attack? This manipulates web page content dynamically, then injects keyloggers to steal users' input. Now, what is Bobsuit? Bobsuit is a web security testing tool and is used for XSS SQLI exploitation. What then is the Bobsuit? Bobsuit is a powerful penetration testing tool used by security professionals to detect and exploit web application vulnerabilities like the SQLI and the cross-site scripting. It intercepts and manipulates HTTP requests to test for security flaws. What are the key features of Bobsuit? It intercepts HTTP requests. This modifies requests before they reach the server. Next, it's used for spidering, which is also called crawling. This maps out all available web pages. Then we have the scanner, which is automated scanning for vulnerabilities like the XSS, SQLI, CSRF. Next on the features of the Bob suite is it's as the intruder, or it's the intruder, which automates brute force attacks and parameter fixing. It has the repeater, which modifies and resends requests to test vulnerabilities manually. Then we have the decoder and encoder, which converts encoded data like the base 64, URL encoding, etc. How then can you configure Bob suite with a web browser? To intercept HTTP traffic, set up burp proxy. Number one, you open Bob suite, go to proxy, go to option. Note that the default proxy listener is the 127.0.0.1:8080. Configure browser proxy. Open Firefox or Chrome setting. Set manual proxy to 127.0.0.1:8080. Enable the use this proxy for all protocols. Then you install Bob CA certificate for HTTPS sites. Then you visit http://burp in the browser. Download and install CA certificate. Add it to the browser's trusted certificate store. SQL injection exploitation in Bob suite. How to detect and exploit SQLI. Number one, you intercept login requests. You go to Burp suite, go to proxy, go and make sure the intercept is on. Enter credentials on a login page and capture the request. Send to intruder, right-click the request, then send to intruder again. Identify injection points, click position tab and set the attack point in the SQLI query parameter. SQLI, username equals username inverted comma, hyphen, and password equals to 1234. Start SQL injection attack, choose attack type, choose the cluster, bomb or sniper, load the SQL payload, which we have below, then click start attack. Check server response. If successful, you will see a 200 OK response with user data. How do we have recursive scripting exploitation with Bob suite? How to detect and explore XSS. First, you intercept a search request. You enter this line of code in the search box, capture the request from Bob proxy, modify and resend, send request to the repeater, and modify input fields with XSS payloads, HTML, with this line of code below. Then check server response. If the payload executes in the browser, the site is vulnerable. If the payload executes in the browser, the site is vulnerable. If the payload executes in the browser, the site is vulnerable. Number 4, you automate XSS scanning. Use Bob suite scanner to test multiple inputs automatically. Additional Bob suite tools for texting. We have the extender, which adds plugin like SQLI, XSS Fixer. We have the logger, which records all HTTP requests and responses. Then we have the sequencer, which tests sessions ID randomness, which is the session hijacking. In conclusion, Bob suite is essential for pen testing, which is penetration testing. It helps discover SQLI, XSS, and other web vulnerabilities. Use responsibly for ethical hacking and bug bounty testing. Thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your day.